Hi, my name is Elizabeth Doty, and it's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of American Promise to a conversation about bipartisan leadership in Congress to end big money in politics. As a member of American Promise's Advisory Council and a committed volunteer with our National Business Network, I'm personally passionate about passing and ratifying the amendment to end big money in politics. Tonight, we have an opportunity to talk with two members of Congress who have proposed H.J. Res. 1, an amendment to the Constitution of the United States to regulate and set reasonable limits on the raising and spending of money by candidates and others to influence elections. I would like to introduce our two distinguished guests. Congressman Ted Deutsch represents Florida's 2nd District in the House of Representatives that's home to communities throughout Southern Palm Beach County and Broward County. And Ted has been described as an accessible and down-to-earth advocate for his constituents by the South Florida Sun Sentinel. He's a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee and a tireless advocate for democracy reform, a leading voice in the movement to get big money out of politics. Congressman John Katko was first elected to the 24th Congressional District of the U.S. House of Representatives in November 2014 and re-elected for a 4th term in November 2020. The 24th District represents all of Onondaga, Cayuga, and Wayne counties and the western portion of Oswego County. A Camillus, New York native, John left a 20-year career as a federal prosecutor to run for public office because he believes Central New York deserves strong, independent leadership in Washington. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us at the National Citizens Leadership Conference, and congratulations on receiving American Promise's Congressional Leadership Award for introducing this bipartisan constitutional amendment. Let me start us off with a couple of background questions, maybe a little personal. Consistent polling over the past decade shows that Americans, by a vast majority, support ending big money's outsized influence. 22 states support efforts towards this constitutional amendment. And to me, that suggests even in a divided country, we share certain core beliefs. As we're working to renew our institutions and our trust in each other, it seems worthwhile exploring those values, beliefs, and convictions that guide us and how they might be shared. So given your leadership and your partnership and your openness on this, I thought maybe I'd start with questions about your own experiences. So to put you on the spot a little bit, what has been your journey towards co-sponsoring the amendment, and how does that draw on your personal beliefs, values, and convictions? And as part of that, why do you think so many Americans share their support for this amendment? Either of you can start.
He's better looking. He can go first.
I am. That's why Representative Katko is such a pleasure to work with. Thanks, John. Elizabeth, thanks. And first, I think this is appropriate. Can I give you a warm welcome to the University of Michigan?
Thank you.
I understand you joined the Urban Institute earlier this year, and as a double alum, I am thrilled to have someone as committed to this issue doing the important work you're going to do at U of M. So congratulations to you.
Thank
and
you
of course, and thanks to Jeff Clements and the rest of American Promise for everyone there for doing the terrific work of bringing folks together to work and getting money out of politics. There are real challenges during this pandemic, and here we are finding a way to have this conversation. And John's been a great partner on this. My journey toward introducing the Democracy for All Amendment goes back to my first election to Congress. I was elected in a special election. I was actually campaigning just weeks before my primary election in January of 2010 when the Supreme Court handed down Citizens United. And there was an open seat in this special election. So I was the first member of Congress elected in the Citizens United era. And since then, we've seen the corrosive influence of money in politics, and we've seen it get worse. And the amendment, importantly, sets out reasonable limits on election spending. It's important to me because we have an opportunity to restore democratic self-government. We can advance political equality so that size of your bank account doesn't determine the size of your impact on our democracy. And we can protect the integrity of government and the electoral process, something that I try to do in my other work as chairman of the House Ethics Committee. But it's taken us a long time to get to this place. And it's so important to have bipartisan support, and Representative Katko is such an important leader in this movement. And I can't thank John, I can't thank you enough for the partnership here. John's voice is essential on so many issues where he has showed that shown that his core beliefs in our democratic system matter the most to him. And that's what we have to focus on as we go forward.
Well, I appreciate it, Ted, and I appreciate you all for having me here. And it's really an honor. I couldn't give a darn whether you have an R or a D after your name. I want to do what's right, you know. And I spent 20 years in a courtroom as a federal organized crime prosecutor, and it was a job I loved. But you know, at some point, it started bugging the heck out of me. That, by the way, these are just a vote noise, so don't worry about it. It's not a fire alarm. I was looking at what was going on in Washington, and it really bothered me. It just bothered me how nasty it was and how partisan it was. And I'm like, you know, I can either sit on the sidelines and complain or get into it and do it. So never been involved in politics, and I ran for politics as a congressman. I got outspent 3-1 and I was able to knock off an incumbent, and I got to Congress. But it was clear during that process that the influence of money was just way too great. Not that it influenced me, and not that it influenced Ted, but it influences the process because you have to raise money to try and survive, right? And as the years went on, it's just getting worse. The last term, there was 72,000 points in my race. Now, 1,000 points is a commercial around the clock for about 10 days and 2 weeks straight. I had 72 of those in my last race. And the amount of money that was spent in my race, both for and against me, a lot of by outside interests who had no idea who I was or what I was. I was just somebody that they want me to keep the seat or don't want me to have the seat. It's just out of control. But early on, I met Ted, and I struck up a conversation, and we started talking about this bill, and I was happy to jump on, and I was the first Republican to do so. I've remained that way, and I'm very proud of it. I mean, to me, the proudest accomplishment I have in Congress is being one of the most bipartisan members in all of Congress. And I was rated one of the most effective lawmakers in the process. So you can be an effective lawmaker, and you can be a bipartisan lawmaker. You don't have to be a partisan flamethrower. The problem is with the partisans, they are slaves somewhat to their cause. They will go out and say and do anything they have to raise money, because they know if they say the magic words on TV, they're going to get a flood of donations online. And that's not what politics is about. And I think to myself, man, if we took money out of the game, a lot of these partisan flamethrowers would have nothing. They wouldn't have power. They wouldn't have clout. And then maybe we could get something done. And so what Ted has proposed, and what I firmly support, is this bill. And I totally trust Ted in the process. And I appreciate him for giving me the opportunity to be the first Republican to sign on. And I feel very strongly about it. I know Ted does too. And I really want to see progress going forward. It's time to get this thing moving.
Thank you. And this will be remembered, right? That vision will be remembered when people look back on how necessary this was and when it succeeds. And I heard each of you reference different values as you described this, right? The actual words of the preamble of the amendment, Congressman Deutsch, around self-government, political equality, and integrity of governing electoral processes. And then Congressman Katko referencing the way the money distorts the effectiveness of lawmaking and the ability to work across the aisle to do what's right, regardless of the D's or the R's in your name. So now here's the question. You said it's the process that kind of corrupts the behavior. Where are you seeing these values that you just described kind of there in your peers in Congress, perhaps maybe not able to act on them yet? And what would enable them to act on those values and pass this amendment? So where are you seeing those values, evident glimmers of them, deeply held, and what would enable those members of Congress to get behind this amendment?
Yeah, I got to tell you, for me, it's the values are, there's some people who rise above it, and some people will take the gutsy vote. When you take a gutsy vote, it's not just that you can incur the wrath of your constituents, you're going to incur the wrath of the big PACs and the big people on the outside who are going to come after you. And there's no greater example of that when I voted as a Republican to impeach a president of the United States of America, and I was the first one to do so. I knew what that meant, and I knew what the implications were going to be for me. And it may prove politically fatal, but it was worth it. There are people out there that are like that, but there are also people who are terrified to do what they think is right because they don't want to incur the wrath, and they don't want to have money, and they don't want to have commercials against them, and they want to raise money. But I just keep thinking it's a very simple thing to me. If you took that out of the matrix and you limited the amount of money that could be used in a campaign, you would have to actually have to talk about the issues, and you would actually have to talk about on the campaign trail, not distortions. And you have to talk about why you would be better than your opponent instead of the nonsense that goes on. It's just completely irrelevant to our mission.
Thank you. And Congressman Deutsch.
Sure. Look, I think that there are, I know that there are many values I share with the vast majority of my colleagues here, Democratic and Republican colleagues alike. But the challenge is turning areas of agreement into real action and actually getting things done. And there are, as John says, there are a lot of unnecessary impediments to that, but reforming our democracy so that it works better for everyone, so that as John points out, we can actually have elections that are about the issues, and not just about issues, but about the issues that people want us to be discussing, that it's not being driven by a handful of wealthy funders and corporate money that's coming into these campaigns. You'll see a change and the values that people that led so many of us to run for office in the first place. You'll actually get to see heightened. I really believe that. And you'll see more concrete action because people will be able to work together, because the debate that took place before they came here will be vigorous, just like the debate is when it's here. And they'll be in a better position to know how to work together and work through issues and ultimately get the things done that people send us here to do.
Thank you. And in a way, so what I hear you saying in a way is it's going to require courage. It requires rising above, but it also in a way could be freeing to have the process work the way these people, what people motivated people to run for office. So now let's move forward a little bit to that idea of action. And this is the conference theme is connect, commit, and act, right? So the people watching us and engaged in the National Citizens Leadership Conference will be moving to action. And we also want to look ahead to the future. One thing that has struck me is that over the past 2 years, there's been a lot of progress on the amendment. It's not reported in mainstream news, but since 2019, 3 additional states have added their names to the list calling for the amendment. New Hampshire in 2019 with a state legislative resolution. They were motivated by the fact that being competitive elections, there were out-of-state interests coming in and spending a lot, similar to what you described, Congressman Katko. Alaska had a similar challenge and in 2020 passed a ballot measure adding their name in support of the amendment, again wanting self-government at a state level. And then finally, Virginia, based on a groundswell of grassroots effort, passed a legislative resolution calling for the amendment, partly based on the work of American Promise and our allies at Take Back Our Republic. So there's been a lot of progress. That brings us to 22 states where citizens will be calling on their members of Congress and asking, why haven't you acted yet on the will of your constituents? And there are more states in the works now, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Texas. Americans want to get this done, but we have some limits and we have some process challenges along the way, right? So given this theme of action, what do you each consider the most impactful thing that members of our community could do? And given the polarization that is partly caused by this, but also blocking it, I'd like to ask each of you to share what you think members of our communities could do, particularly across the aisle. So Congressman Katko, what would you recommend to progressives in the American Promise audience, as well as anyone else, is what they could most do to move this forward? And then Congressman Deutsch, I'll ask the same.
It's a good old fashioned make some noise, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you gotta get out. It's lobbying. It's good old fashioned stating your cause and making some noise about it. I think that's exactly what you are doing is what we need to do. And I feel very strongly about that. And I don't know, I haven't talked to Ted about this, but I do also think it would be very helpful, in my opinion, for us in Congress to, put it up for a vote and see where people are. We may surprise, we may get it a pass and all of a sudden like, holy cow, we got it done. Or we can then figure out who we need to work on and start working on it again. Sometimes the votes like this that are landmark votes, they take a term or two, and maybe we should get it up for a vote and just kind of see where we're at. And I'm a pain in the ass when it comes to that. I can whip people a lot, very hard if I need to, and I'm very convincing. I know Ted is too, because Ted convinced me. So I think the combination of the two, continuing to do what you're doing, turning up the heat as much as you can, and making the noise. And for us, I don't know if Ted feels this way, but I think getting a vote out there and, if nothing else, laying down a marker, but we may surprise everybody, because I think a lot of people are ready for it. And I don't think it's a Democratic principle. And I don't think it's a Republican principle. And I think everyone is sick of the money in politics and how important that is. It's got an outsized level of importance. And this is our time. And I'd say we give it a shot on the floor of the House of Representatives.
Fantastic. Something to add to our lobby day requests as we're meeting.
There you go.
Great. Representative Deutsch.
Yeah, I think John's right about proceeding to a vote. I think having a vote is a really important step. I also think when you're talking to members of Congress and members of the House, members of the Senate, I think it's appropriate. In fact, I think it's important for you to ask them how much time they spend, what the balance of time is between raising money and responding to the needs of their constituents. And my guess is a lot of people are going to get really uncomfortable with the question, because the system is set up now because of all of this money, and it's so expensive to run for office now. The system is set up to just fuel itself. That you get on this treadmill. A lot of members need to raise enormous amounts of money, and just start raising money, and then that becomes the largest part of, maybe not every day, but some days. So I would suggest ask them how much time they spend, and then ask them if they wouldn't rather be spending all of that time with them, and all of that time talking to the folks back home, and all that time working with me and Representative Katko and their colleagues, coming up with just new ideas to do the kinds of things that we need to do as a country. And maybe that gets them to start thinking about it a little bit differently, that this isn't a partisan issue, as all of us know. It's not a partisan, as you pointed out, it's not a partisan issue anywhere else in the country, but often it winds up being one here. And whether you're a progressive, whether you're a conservative, everyone here, I absolutely believe, wants to do what's best in terms of legislating for their constituents. So wouldn't it be great if there were more time to do it, because we acted to limit the amount of money and thereby influence in politics?
I got to add something, if I just may. I'm sorry to speak out of turn, but Ted's exactly right. I want to just put a little bit more on that. It's also how the leaders have an undue influence on us, because they can basically strong arm you into a vote and basically tell you without telling you, you ain't gonna get help from me if you don't do this one, or what have you. And there's a lot of outsized pressure that may make you feel a lot more independent if you don't have to worry about that. So there's a lot of reasons why, Ted's 100% right about asking them how much time you spend, but also ask them, do you ever feel pressure from leadership that if you don't do this, you're going to lose their financial backing? And that's a very big thing as well, no doubt about it.
It's interesting. I had heard reports from the Rebuilding Congress initiative that members often felt disempowered because they were so dependent on that money flow. And I love the way you're painting this as a path out, as a path forward, as a path out of this mess. Excuse me. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Well, let's do a little visioning now of the future. Let's imagine it's July 4th, 2026. The amendment has passed and been ratified on schedule. We're celebrating, including your leadership and many others who have joined you. And let's imagine that you're preparing for an election in 2028, for a campaign in 2028. I'd like to ask you to think about what would be most different. Imagine when we've ended the dominant role of big money in politics, what would change in your careers, in your day-to-day lives, in how you're able to represent your constituents? And it'd be ideal if it were down to like literally how your day would be different. Anything you'd like to share about that?
Well, first, let me say that would be an incredible moment. We will celebrate. It will not be virtual. It will very much be in real life. Look, when I first introduced an amendment on this issue, I knew it wouldn't be easy and that we were going to have to work really hard to build support. And that's why everything American Promise is doing through the NCLC is so important. This is all about the groundwork for future success. What will it look like if we get big money out of politics? members will spend less time fundraising. That's especially true from out-of-state big money funders. They'll spend a lot more time in their communities. They'll spend a lot more time listening to their constituents because they're going to have to respond much more directly to the needs of their constituents in order to get reelected. They're not going to be able to rely on a constant stream of commercials and mail and all the other ways that money is spent. I think it's going to be easier also to do small d democratic things to protect election security and make sure our elections run smoothly. And most importantly, I hope it means that people will start to feel more connected to their government again, so that people will understand that their voice and their opinion and what they care about matters just as much as anyone else. And when we get over the imbalance that we have and all of the huge money that's coming in, we bolster the integrity of government, and then we find ourselves in a situation where people really will start to have trust again. That's how we start to reform not just the government, but then our nation starts to look a lot better and a lot more cohesive than it is right now.
You know what, I couldn't agree more with what Ted just said, and I adopt everything he said, so I'm not going to restate that. I will tell you though, if we get to a time where this amendment's passed and it becomes law, we'll be doing so many high fives, my hands will hurt. And in addition to what Ted said, one of my observations would be that I think we would get back to a time where debates were more substantive and less about show and more about getting things done. And less preening for the cameras or preening for some 30-second video you could send out for a fundraising video, or trying to satisfy one group to keep them from coming after you. Without that pressure there, I think we'd have more of the people's work getting done in a more logical and reasonable manner. And I can tell you, based on what happened on January 6th, and then the subsequent vote on the Electoral College, I know some of my colleagues felt so much pressure to vote to decertify the election, even though I think in their heart they felt otherwise. If they didn't have that outside pressure, I venture to guess votes like that would come more naturally to them. They would have less outside influence and outside pressure on them, because people in Congress are fundamentally good people. The vast majority of them are. And they fundamentally, I think they do want to do the right thing. The problem is right now they're kind of probably not by design, but just by happenstance, they're kind of unfairly influenced by these outside groups. So if you get rid of that outside influence and the elections, you raise a small amount of money and then you run for election based on how many town halls you do, or how many times you go out and knock on someone's door, or shake their hand in a parade, and they judge you by looking at you as a person and what you are on paper, not what some 30-second ad is telling you about, or how bad the other person is, right? If we get back to that time, I'd venture to guess we're gonna have more substantive discussions, and maybe just maybe politics won't be so nasty, and maybe just maybe won't be so partisan. That's what I hope, and that's what my dream is. And I got to tell you, I'm so appreciative for Ted to get me involved with this movement, and I'm going to see it to its fruition. And I hope we get a vote on it soon, and I hope it's successful. But make no mistake about it, Ted's committed to it. I'm committed to it, and there's a lot more people in Congress than you might think committed to it. So let's get this thing moving. And I appreciate all of you for all your interest in it. And thank you very much for the award. It means a lot to me, and I just want to say thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Hear, hear. Thanks, John.
Thank you.